The Soviet Union's wartime production of fighter planes marked the early careers of designers who would go on to receive worldwide fame. To follow in the footsteps of Mikoyan and Gurevich, another brilliant technician was Semyon Alexeyevich Lavochkin, whose initials became synonymous with a family of fighters that lasted until the 1950s. From the LaGG-1 of 1940 to the La-11 of 1947, the last aircraft powered by a piston engine to serve in the Soviet Air Force. As early as 1938, Lavochkin began working with two other gifted technologists, Vladimir Petrovich Gorbunov and Mikhail Ivanovich Gudkov, with whom he completed his first project. It was a single-seater fighter that was given the designation I-22 at first and then LaGG-1 later on. The prototype had its first flight on March 30, 1940. The aircraft was a low-wing monoplane, carefully studied from an aerodynamic point of view and fitted with completely retractable landing gear. The fact that it was constructed completely of wood, with the exception of the moving elements, which were metal, and the fabric covering, made it unusual among its kind. The fuselage, empennage, and wings had a supporting framework in wood onto which a covering of diagonal strips of plywood was glued using special resins. It was powered by a massive Klimov M105 liquid-cooled V12 engine that produced 1,050 horsepower at takeoff. Sadly, the results of the test flights were less than ideal. So many adjustments were made before production started. Modifications included a larger fuel capacity, slats on the leading edge of the wings, a more robust and supercharged Klimov M105 engine, and a 3-bladed variable pitch metal propeller. The prototype was renamed I-301, and once testing was finished, the fighter was sent into production with the official title LaGG-3. In 1941, the manufacturing line started cranking out the first production aircraft. As was the case with the Yak-1 and the MiG-3, this fighter quickly rose through the ranks to become one of the most important aircraft of the new generation of Soviet Air Force aircraft during the early stages of the war. Throughout mass production, the LaGG's arsenal saw a shift in makeup. The standard 1941 configuration included a 20mm cannon and synchronized machine guns, 1 BS and 2 shacks. In addition, 6 to 8 rockets could be placed under the wing. Unfortunately, the LaGG-3's high flight data could not be maintained throughout its manufacturing and refinement stages. The speed had been greatly reduced. Most of the LaGG-3's victories came from its use against enemy bombers, when its advantage in in-flight data and missile power proved decisive. When it came to assault operations, this aircraft was equally effective. The pilots of the LaGG-3, nevertheless, had to engage in air fights with hostile planes more often. In this context, LaGG's limitations owing to its excessive size were readily apparent. From the looks of things, it was inferior to the Messerschmitt Bf-109E or Bf-109F, due to a decision made by the State Defense Committee, one of the most formidable aviation facilities that manufactured the vast majority of LaGG-3s had ceased manufacturing the aircraft. Instead of LaGG, production of Yak fighters was undertaken at the site, whereas LaGG-3 production continued at Plant No. 31 in Tbilisi. There, under the leadership of VP Gorbunov in 1942 to 1943, work was carried out to improve the combat capability of the LaGG-3. Several attempts were made to install the M106 and M107 engines on the fighter, but none were successful. Gorbunov made another attempt to improve the flight performance of the LaGG-3 by installing the M105 PT engine on the aircraft. In October 1943, the fighter, then known as Object 105, successfully completed state testing. The form of the cockpit lamp, which resembled a drop, was the first thing that drew attention to it. The plane was equipped with a Schrack cannon and a BS machine gun, each of which could fire up to 200 rounds of ammunition. The aircraft weighed 2,818 kilograms at takeoff and had a top speed of 612 kilometers per hour. In February of 1944, aircraft model 105-2 was introduced with an M105 PF2 engine that had a starting power of 1,290 horsepower and a working power of 1,310 horsepower at an altitude of 2,000 meters. The fuel tanks were downsized from 405 to 377 liters, and the Schlach gun was swapped out for a VYA-23 loaded with 85 rounds. The BS machine gun had 185 rounds of ammunition. State testing was conducted between May 10 and June 12, 1944, and the fighter was cleared. But then it had a sad ending. The aircraft noted flaws in the design of the propeller group, weak armament, and low flight parameters. Compared to the German fighter planes, the Bf-109G6 and FW-190D9, the 105-2 was utterly inferior. In light of this, the Air Force Research Institute proposed discontinuing serial manufacture because continued development of the model was unlikely to provide huge benefits. The LaGG-3 of the 66th series was the most recent and cutting-edge update. This plane saw the implementation of Tasagi suggestions in the domain of airframe aerodynamics. Some changes were made to the design of the aircraft based on the developments of the Yakovlev Design Bureau for the Yak-1B aircraft. The scarce Delta wood, the supply of resin for its production, ceased with the outbreak of war with Germany, was gradually replaced by ordinary pine, which has a much lower specific gravity. Measures were also taken to minimize the aircraft's takeoff weight by simplifying and upgrading the aircraft's equipment. The takeoff weight of the LaGG-3 of the 66th series decreased to 2,990 kilograms, which was not much more than the lightweight LaGG-3 of 1942. With its top speed of 591 kilometers per hour and rate of climb of 893 meters per minute, the LaGG-3 aircraft of the 66th series could compete with the primary German fighters of the Eastern Front, the Bf-109G6 and the FW-190A3, on an even playing field. But in terms of firepower, the LaGG-3 still fell short. Nevertheless, aircraft of the 66th series were constructed in Tbilisi from the spring of 1943 until the middle of 1944. As a part of their 66th series, LaGG-3 built a total of 6,528 fighter planes. The widespread opinion about the LaGG as a fighter of the initial war period is fundamentally wrong. In 1944, the Red Army Air Force numbered a total of 594 LaGG-3s. Of course, LaGGs were no longer used in the direction of the main strike, giving way to more advanced LA-5, LA-7, Yak-9, and Yak-3s. At the conclusion of the war, LaGGs fought mainly in the Baltic and Karelian Isthmus, where the primary adversary was the Finns, who had fighters that were a whole generation behind the most up-to-date models. The fighters of the Air Force of the Baltic Fleet advanced furthest to the west. The LaGGs of the 3rd GIAP ended the war in Courland. By May 1945, almost all of the LaGGs in the fighting forces had been wiped out. Even in the Far East, part of the regiments armed with LaGGs received new equipment, particularly the 300th IAP, in which the future jet ace of the Korean War, Yevgeny Pepelyaev, served, was re-equipped from LaGG-3 to the Yak-9. In the course of production, numerous other experimental prototypes were completed during production, built to improve the aircraft's characteristics. Lavochkin, in particular, dedicated himself to the task of perfecting it. After many fruitless efforts, success was finally realized with the introduction of a completely new kind of engine. This was the Shevtsov M82 radial engine, and once it had been fitted on the LaGG-3, it transformed it into a first-class aircraft, the LaGG-5 of 1942, one of the best Soviet fighters of the entire war.